Welcome back to the Developer Odyssey episode number 13 entitled Funky Frameworks. Hey, if this is the first video that you've seen in this series, I highly recommend that you click the link down in the description to the playlist. That'll take you all the way back. You can start at the beginning and follow all the way through to get to where we are today. Of course, feel free to continue watching or skip around in the playlist, whatever you prefer. If you've been looking into becoming a developer or you've been a junior developer for a while and you've maybe just started the basics of learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, or maybe some other programming language, you might have heard this term frameworks. So what exactly is a framework? Well, a framework is basically just a set of tools or code libraries or conventions or rules that are created to help you as kind of a starting point for whatever it is that you're looking to develop. For example, if you've ever heard of WordPress, WordPress itself is basically just a framework. It gives you a starting point of code and it gives you kind of some basic rules and patterns and things to follow so that you can build a website with that tool, with that framework. Now that's a framework for building websites, and that's a little bit different from what we're talking about. Although if you're going to develop WordPress themes and WordPress plugins and things like that, you're definitely going to actually be working with the WordPress framework. But today I want to talk about some familiar frameworks that you might be hearing here and there around the web development world, especially when it comes to web application development. So again, frameworks are just tools or libraries to help us do things more efficiently, to give us some direction, to give us a starting point, to help us really get jump started, especially on a web application, because web applications are very large oftentimes, and they do a lot of things repetitively. You have to build all the same types of things over and over and over again, whether it's user authentication or user management, or maybe it's just simple things like the same types of lists or the same types of forms or all those different things. They can get tedious to create over and over and over again from scratch. And so a framework gives you a lot of that functionality already built in so that we can just kind of jumpstart what we're trying to build. Now, there's lots of different types of frameworks depending on the language that you're working with. For example, there are several different types of frameworks for CSS, for styling. Some of the most popular are Bootstrap or Materialize or Tailwind. So you probably hear some of these terms thrown around, and what these are basically libraries that kind of give you presets for different styles of different components. So like a different style for inputs or different styles for buttons or different styles for headers or even image layouts or modals or things like that. All these different types of components. A lot of times these CSS frameworks will give you a framework, a starting point, a set of rules to be able to generate these things. And so they're all looking consistent. They all seem to fit together within a certain scheme, a certain design. And you can just kind of use the things that they have created, and it saves you a lot of time. One of the more complicated aspects of front-end web development is working with JavaScript, especially if you're just working with native JavaScript. It can be a little bit daunting to do all the different things that you want to do, especially if you want to have an application that's reactive. It does all kinds of different things while you're on the page, and you can interact with it without it going to a different page, without it refreshing the page, and all these cool things that you see web applications do. That's generally done with JavaScript. And most of the time nowadays, it's done through a JavaScript framework. We have multiple popular frameworks. React, Angular, and Vue are the three kind of most popular frameworks these days when it comes to front-end frameworks for JavaScript. And as of the time of me making this video, React is probably the most popular one. We're seeing a lot more jobs for that right now, but my personal favorite is Vue. I think it's just the easiest to learn, and it does the same thing all the rest of them do. Now, for front-end languages, that's pretty much it. HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So you don't have a ton of frameworks there. You don't have a ton of languages to deal with there. But when it comes to the back end, there's all kinds of different languages for the back end. Like we've mentioned before, you've got PHP, you've got Java, you've got C#, you've got Node, you've got Go, you've got probably Python. You've got others that I'm probably not even thinking of, Rust. You know, there's all these different types of programming languages, and unfortunately, they come with their own framework. So you're definitely going to want to pick a framework for your specific coding language, and they are very vast and broad. I work mostly with PHP on the back end, so my preferred framework is Laravel. That's what we use at the company that I work for. I think it's the best framework out there for doing web application development with PHP. So now that we know what frameworks are and maybe a little bit of what types of frameworks are available, let's take a look at the pros and the cons. Let's start with the pros of using a framework. The first pro that I see is that you have quick development. Again, it's something to help you get jump started. It gives you a lot of functionality right away. The very first framework I ever used was a framework called CodeIgniter. It's an old PHP framework. It's actually very similar in a lot of ways to Laravel, but they are different products, obviously. And so my very first one years and years ago was CodeIgniter. And what it did is it provided a lot of functionality that I would have had to write on my own, but I was able to get a jump start even back then with that framework. And of course, today we have all kinds of little ecosystems that are built around these frameworks that give you lots of functionality out of the box so that you don't have to spend time spinning your wheels, getting things up and running. You can get moving right away. Not only do they give you quick development, but they also give you consistency. And this is really important when you're working on a team. See, everybody kind of has their own way of doing things. They have their own way of building. They have their own way of thinking through problems. They have their own way of writing code. No two coders write code exactly the same way. And so what the framework does is it gives you a framework. It gives you a set of rules within which you write your code. Now, even there, you're still going to see differences in how people use the framework, how people code within that framework, but it gives you a greater level of consistency of your code if everyone's staying within the rules of the framework. And that consistency also makes it easier for new people to come into a project and just get up and running because they're familiar with the framework. Plus, frameworks often come again with this pretty big ecosystem. Laravel has a massive ecosystem of tutorials, of training, of people creating other packages to add to Laravel, to add other functionality sort of out of the box, such as multi-tenancy or being able to take payments online or sell subscriptions or all these different things that you can do with Laravel and just add a package from the community that other people have built to help the community build faster and build better. And finally, probably the best thing about frameworks is because they're community driven usually, and because their goal is to make things better and easier for you, a lot of times they're a lot more secure. If you tried to build a lot of these applications from scratch, there's probably going to be some security holes, especially when you're first learning. You don't even know what all the holes are to look for. And having a framework is really going to help you kind of plug those holes up automatically because they take care of a lot of those security issues. So frameworks sound really, really great. Why wouldn't we use them? What's the problem with frameworks? Well, at the end of the day, a framework is one more thing to learn. It's another thing, almost as much as a language to learn. You've got to learn how the framework works, what the rules are for the framework, what the expectations are for how you're going to work within that framework. It's just something extra to learn, and that takes time. Also, they can be pretty flexible or inflexible depending on the framework. I personally prefer a very inflexible framework. I like for the framework to dictate pretty much how we do things so that we all do things the same way. Some people like a little bit more flexible framework so that they can have a little bit more flexibility in what they do and how they manipulate things. I think Laravel gives kind of a good mix there in that process. But if you're looking to just have the freedom to build whatever you want, a framework's probably not going to be the thing that you want because it's going to tie you into doing things certain ways. Oftentimes, frameworks also come with a lot of bloat. They come with a lot of features that you may not be using. If you're building a very simple application or a very simple website, you may not need all the different functionality that comes with this framework that just takes up space and takes up processing power and processing speed. You may not need all of that. And so it just might be too bloated for your specific situation. And lastly, unfortunately, if you're building software based on a framework, you're pretty much stuck with that framework. It's really hard to move from one framework to another framework without largely rewriting a lot of what you've done before. Now, that can be a good thing if you've got a framework that's constantly being built and constantly being improved and you've got a great community around it. That's not so much a problem. But if you have an older framework and nobody's supporting it and it dies, that's going to be a pain in the rear to go move to something better like Laravel. So can you tell that I like Laravel? Well, hopefully this has been a help to you understanding what frameworks are, how they work, and whether or not you should use them in your next project. Hey, if you're finding this video or this series helpful, click the like button for me, just so we can get YouTube to share it to more people and help other people as they're starting their dev journey, their developer odyssey. Thanks for spending time with me today, and I'll see you on the next one.